I mean, I should have died so many times. We just had a little bit of rice, umeboshi, a little bit of dried fish, one bottle of sake, which went very quickly. And so I ended up having to climb further up this mountain, then back down, and then in. And so it was ugh, like mud up to here, and there's the whole like Wizard of Oz kind of like, where did that top half of a house come from? Because it's right in the middle of the road, and I don't understand how it got there.
Welcome back to another episode of the Inside Japan podcast, which is sponsored by JobsinJapan.com, the best place on the internet to find your next job in Japan. I'm Charlie, and on this episode, I'm speaking with Matt. We'd intended to talk about how he came to Japan for the underground music scene as an English teacher, but ended up doing PR and his own consulting business. But his story of how he ended up surviving the 3/11 earthquake up in Iwate was fascinating, and so we ended up speaking mostly about that. I hope you find this story as humbling as I did. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Sure, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you talked a little bit about with me before we started this podcast about how you came to Japan, your interest in the underground extreme music scene. Tell me a little bit more about how you got into that and what sort of helped you to get to Japan so you could be part of that scene.
That's a funny story, actually. So I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the U.S. So Pittsburgh is a very punk city. It wasn't particularly metal, and as far as I know, it isn't very metal now either. But punk, is pretty good. There were a number of bands, Rotten, Don Caballero, and a few others that came out of there. Anyway, punk scene was pretty good. And one of the, if not the, kind of the underground headquarters, as it were, of the Pittsburgh punk scene was a place called the Mr. Roboto Project. I don't know why they named it that, but I don't think it had anything to do with the band. Hole in the wall, in kind of the not business district, let's call it, of Pittsburgh. No stage, max could probably, I mean, if you really crammed people in there, you could probably get 50.
Wow.
So just filthy punk rock, right? And that was a great spot. I kind of grew up, cut my teeth there. I've got a lot of respect for that place and, kind of the punk scene in Pittsburgh in general. But anyway, after a number of years, I think, well, probably like a year or two, because I was 14 when this happened. I mean, I had no interest in anime or robots or, kind of the typical things that often attract some people to Japan. That just really wasn't my thing. And I can't even remember the show, who was opening. Somebody was opening, a local band that I liked was opening, and I had not heard of whichever band. Well, I'll get to whichever band. Anyway, I went to a show totally unaware that there was a Japanese band playing. That band's name was Quill, Quill, and they play a particular version of hardcore punk known as power violence. It's similar to grindcore, but that's a longer discussion on the differences between genres. Anyway, it was a really good show. And there's a lot to talk about that I won't get into, but it was a lot of fun, very impressive, really powerful performance. And I had no idea. I could say like thank you, but they made an impression on me basically, and I didn't know how to talk to them, which kind of bugged me. And so for some reason that band, that was probably like the summer of 2001, maybe. Between then and it was every summer vacation, right? The Japanese bands, punk and metal and noise, kept coming through Pittsburgh for some reason to the Mr. Roboto Project, nowhere else. And to this day, I still don't know why, because Pittsburgh's not, I mean, it's not a nowhere city, but it's not on like the major circuit for international touring bands, regardless of kind of fame. So I got lucky, basically. But that's how I decided to start studying Japanese, because I wanted to talk to hardcore punk bands. And yeah, So that's my interest and the easiest way. Yeah, so I had a double major in history and philosophy, and I studied Japanese because I like hardcore punk. So it's not like graduating college, my resume was like, oh, here is somebody that you should hire. Uh, you know what I mean? And so in order to get over to Japan, as many people have done before me and since, I took a job with the English teaching organization, and ended up over here, and specifically in a place called Miyako, in Iwate Prefecture. That was in 2000. I think I got there. When was it? I think it was November 14th, 2009, that I arrived there. Um, Fishing town. I think it was a town of about 50,000 or so. Very blue collar. If you know where Iwate is, it's way up north, right below Aomori, right on the coast. And I was there until April 16th, I think, 2011, which should ring some bells if you're familiar with the 311 tsunami that happened.
Right.
Yeah, that major, the movie that everybody knows of the wave, that was my neighborhood. Actually, you
Oh,
can see,
wow.
yeah, you can see the in the distance on the far left. You can't really make out what it is, but there's like a little red sign kind of thing. That's an Enios gas station, and I lived right past that. So yeah, that happened, and then after about a month of, I can't say that I was a first line responder because that has like an official sounding official sound to it, but basically being homeless and shoveling mud for about a month. My company at the time discovered that I was still alive and demanded that I move out of a disaster zone and down to Tokyo, which I did. So
Wow, that must have been really scary. Like I came to Japan a year after the earthquake, and even then, the discussions about it, there were, I think I was living in Fukuoka, and there were some,
okay.
refugees at some of the schools that I was teaching at, and I can only imagine what it was like actually being there and like you said, shoveling mud for a month or something after the earthquake. What happened? What happened on the day for you?
Actually, I mean, I should have died so many times.
Oh my gosh.
uh, it was a Friday, like 311, the day of the tsunami through March 11th was a Friday. And in Miyako, I worked in two schools actually. I worked at Miyako High School and Miyako Kita High School. I worked at Miyako High School Monday through Thursday, and then at Kita on Fridays. Miyako was pretty centrally located. I lived a little bit on the outskirts, but not really. Anyway, it was like biking distance, whereas Kita was like a 25-ish minute bus ride to the north to a village that had become part of Miyako City called Taro. And so I taught there every Friday. And so Thursday night, I think it was around like 8 p.m. or so, I got a call from my associate at Miyako Kita saying like, hey dude, we just finished testing and stuff, so like, I don't really got anything for you. Just like, take tomorrow off. It's fine. I'm like, oh, all right, whatever. So of course I proceed to go out with my friends till like 4 or 5 a.m. to the local bars and everything. And so we do that. We specifically went to a place called Daichan, which a friend ran. And that was kind of comes into the story later. This can get long. I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but
Yeah,
um,
give me the compressed version, like what actually happened on the day, and what was your sort of reaction to the earthquake itself? Because
I was
you know,
eating an omelet and watching I believe, 1976 classic movie Network, when stuff started shaking. Also, a lot of people don't know, like 3 days prior, there was a really big one. That one scared the shit out of me. That one is when I ran downstairs and was like knocking because I lived above my landlord, who I was friends with, and was like, I remember the day 3 days before. It was like maybe it was a weekend. Anyway, for whatever reason, I was at my apartment knocking on the door, and my landlord just coming to being like, what do you want? I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, this is a huge space. He's like, yeah, it's nothing. You'll know when you're supposed to run, is what he said. So I'm eating the omelet, watching the movie, stuff started shaking. I waited at least a minute. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Until finally I was like, okay, I guess this is what he meant. So
Yeah.
I run out. And then I mean a whole bunch of stuff happened, but basically right behind I lived, I mean, if I ran out my door and wanted to jump into the ocean, I could have done that within 10 seconds. Like I was maybe like legit maybe 30 meters from the Pacific Ocean.
Wow.
And right behind our apartment was a rather large hill, on top of which was a temple called Zen Ninji, which my landlord was friends with the lead head monk, I guess is the name. They were both hung. And so we ran up there, stayed there for about 3 days, not necessarily because we wanted to, but because we couldn't leave. There was entirely too much rubble. We were trapped
Wow.
in a Buddhist temple. And the city was also on fire, but that's whatever. And so third day, I managed to climb further up the mountain. I had to go scavenge for food
Oh my
for
God.
everybody.
This sounds like a disaster
So
movie now already.
it was. And so finally, I'm just like, shit, we got kids. There was like 20 of us. There were 3 kids. Most of the people there were over 90 years old. We just had a little bit of rice, umeboshi, a little bit of dried fish, 1 bottle of sake, which went very quickly. Uh, and so I ended up having to climb further up this mountain, then back down, and then in. And so it was ugh, like mud up to here, and there's the whole like Wizard of Oz kind of like, where did that top half of a house come from? Because it's right in the middle of the road, and I don't understand how it got there,
Oh
kind of stuff.
man.
I get to the city center just outside of the disaster. Well, I mean, it's still the disaster area, but like, I mean, no kidding, like muck up to here that you're just wading through. And I get there, I go to the first Lawson, it was, thinking like, oh boy, convenience store food. That's where, sure, of course, they'll have the disaster. So, they've already been not stripped, but, people are waiting in line and whatnot. And I remember actually at the back of the line were 2 of my students from the school that I was supposed to be at on that day. And I was or on 311, and I remember being like, yo, dudes, like, okay, good, you're here, that's a positive. Like, what happened to Taro? Like, what's the word? And I remember them just saying mole night. I think 2 weeks later or so, the first news crew that came managed to get to Miyako was an Irish news crew, what, RTS, something like that. And we went to Taro, and I distinctly remember there was a Lawson sign still standing. That's it. Everything else was leveled. It looked like it was bombed.
My God.
So and so anyway, Lawson didn't have any food. So I'm like, and it's like sunset, and I'm like, oh shit, I gotta go back through the muck to my temple on the hill somehow with no food and whatnot. But then another earthquake happens, and there's another tsunami warning. And right then, my best friend Seiji Shimoyama, I can hear him from the distance, being like, "Matt, you're alive! Like, get over here!" And so then he's like, "All right, you're," basically forces me to stay at his place, which is nearby. They have stockpiles of food and stuff, and so from there, we and there were 7 or so other people or other friends in addition to myself that they were putting up who were also either homeless or somehow displaced. And from there, for about a month, we every morning would put on the typical Japanese like workman suit. We had shovels, we had pickaxes, we had all that stuff. We'd run. I ran food to the temple. Somehow I got a really big box of sanma, like sanma the fish, like they're like
Oh right.
large. I don't even know where it came from, but one day I just ended up with this big box of really fresh samba. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna give it to the temple guys because they deserve it. It's like a whole bunch of weird, kind of can't explain it. Interestingly enough, punk rock actually factors into this in that before the self-defense force, before the Yakuza, before the police, before anybody else showed up, somehow uh there's a there's a punk rock venue in Sapporo, Hokkaido, which keep in mind is on another island, called Counteraction, and it's run by a guy named Cole. And Cole-san is the vocalist of a hardcore punk band called Slang, which is quite large. And he's friends with some of our friends. To this day, I have no idea how they did it, but they were the ones like the first responders from outside of the city to show up first with like grills and burgers in studs and spikes,
Oh
right?
my gosh! Of all the things to show up with,
Yeah. It was the weirdest thing. But
it's
yeah, so that
crazy how
happened.
quickly your life can change from, I'm teaching at a school tomorrow and oh, you got a day off to, scavenging for food and having towns leveled in front of you. I mean, that must have been crazy. What did you think was going to happen at that time? Like, were you thinking, I don't know, like, how do I get out of here, or where am I supposed to go? Should I go back to my home country, or what were you thinking?
So the that's a very good question. The Buddhist temple definitely helped with this. All throughout it, every morning, the first 3 days anyway that I was there, they conducted their rituals every morning, right, at 7 a.m., which involved like a gong, right? And they invited me to sit in on it too. And so there I am, like a homeless. And of course, we're listening to this crank radio in the dark by candlelight, drinking our only bottle of sake. That's how we found out about Fukushima, right? And so it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, what? We thought the world already ended. It's worse elsewhere. Um, where was I going with this? Oh, the Buddhist. Yeah, right. So first day, like 311. Shock. Basically, you're kind of not thinking. There's just like nothing is in your head.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah. And so, like, I remember the night sky being extremely beautiful and clear that night, despite the fact that across the bay, that was the industrial area and all of the gas lines had burst. And so it was on fire.
Wow.
So there's that on day one. So day one is nothing, right? At the Buddhist temple. Day two is that's panic. That's, oh my God, my computer, my guitars, my amps, my suits, my refrigerator, my like how much does all of that even cost? Like,
Right.
and then you think, oh, wait a minute. They said like the roads are totally dead and the trains are down and like we have no internet connection and the cell towers are busted. We can't commute. Like, oh, can I even get out of here? Is that even
Yeah.
possible? And so that was like a super low point, day two. And then day three, it was when Buddhism kind of kicked in. And kind of coming to a realization of like, you know what, like guitars, computers, suits, like, I mean, it'd be nice if I didn't have to rebuy them, but fact of the matter is, none of that was really particularly sentimental. Like in the scheme of things, it sort of doesn't matter. And I've got my people with me. We've got some
Mm.
fire. I've got a coat, got a roof. Like things are pretty good compared to what it could be.
Right.
So that sticks with me today. I mean, that I applied that to even to kind of how I conduct business as well, which is to say like lean, agile. All of these things very much come from my experience with dealing with a. I mean, legit, like the place that I was supposed to be on Friday. Look it up on Wikipedia. If I remember correctly, the wave there, Taro Miyako Iwate, was 39.3 meters tall.
Oh my God. So that if
Right.
you had gone to work that day, we might not be talking. It might
Oh
be a
yeah, but
different
I mean
story.
too, like the bar that we were at the night before, that got leveled. Had I not woken up earlier, I would have been gone. When we were running up the hill, I remember my landlord, it was a married couple, and the wife, Kazuko-san, were like running up the hill with their dog John. And she turns to me and was like, "Hey, did you get your passport?" And I was like, no, I didn't. And so I ran back down to get my passport. That's when I realized, like, you do the stupidest things in like not panic mode, but like disaster in the moment right now mode. Like, I grabbed my messenger bag that's over there, but I didn't put anything in it, so that's useless, more or less. I could have gotten my bike, which would have been great to have, but didn't get that. I got my iPod at the time, but it didn't have a battery charge, and I also didn't take headphones. What else? Like, I just just like, all right, I'm gonna take that. Like, let's whatever, it's something.
Right.
So yeah, disasters kind of like make you an idiot
Well, you're not really
unless you're
thinking when you're in disaster mode, right? Like that's one of the reasons why they tell you that you should have a kind of disaster kit or a
yeah,
bag or
that's why
something
you
that
should
you
have
can
a
bring
go
with
bag.
you. Huh.
Yeah, it's not because it's like you'll be an idiot. Like,
Yeah,
you will
yeah.
become an idiot, right?
Right,
You won't
you
be
don't
able.
think about what stuff you actually really need to survive. Like, okay, well, I need blankets because it's going to be cold, and I need, a gas stove or something that can run without electricity because there might not be electricity, and two gas cans will last
That's
you
why
like.
like buy butane lighters and not regular lighters, right? Those are far more useful than matches or like regular lighters and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I've got my ghost stuff, but yeah. So I mean, it was an incredibly intense experience. I'm still very good friends with people up there, second family kind of thing.
Yeah, I can imagine that
But
kind
yeah,
of thing bonds you together.
yeah, one could say. Yeah, but that's in a nutshell anyway. That's how I moved to Tokyo.
Mm. Okay, so tell me about that then. What happened after? So after that experience of basically having all of your possessions and your life sort of wiped away, then you moved to Tokyo. What happened next, like with your company, or did you then decide like, okay, I'm going to do something different? Was there like some kind of life, uh, I guess, affirming reawakening of like, I don't know what I was doing there in the first place, or what happened after that?
I mean, I wouldn't call it like real, but I mean, the fact is, where I lived, right? I was comfortable, I was happy, you know. I wasn't resigned to it, but I was like kind of used to it. You know what I mean? And thinking at some point, okay, business. Obviously, I'll have to go to Tokyo, but yeah, I'm 23 or 24. I got some time, so I wasn't really thinking too much. I don't think. So when I got down there, my company was very accommodating. They hooked me up with. I mean, I had a job, so I had money coming in. My friends in Miyako have friends down here too, so there was very much. I had a really strong support system of people that I had never met. I mean, I mentioned his name once. Seiji is kind of like my older brother kind of figure. He just made some calls. He's like, "Yo, my boy's down in Tokyo. Like, my boy up here, he's coming down. Like, you're gonna get him an apartment. You're gonna take him out to dinner. You're gonna you're gonna do this. You're gonna do that. He's good people. Like, he helped out up here. He's this, that, and the other thing. Like, you need to, like, he's part of the crew. Like, support him." So I had that. Um, it was odd. Nobody knows. I mean, to this day, you can't explain. I mean, because you've heard the stories about, maybe, well, you were in Fukuoka, right?
Right.
But I'm sure you've heard the stories of, like, oh yeah, Tokyo shut down and people who lived in Yokohama had to walk back from Meguro, and all of this stuff. And I mean, I'm not poo-pooing that. Like, that sucks.
Yeah.
That's not a good experience. But like, it's not my experience, and the things that you go through in a disaster zone like we did in Miyako, as well as Kamaishi, the entire Iwate coast, Rikuzen Takada, all of these places. Like, no matter what you tell people, it's just they can't get. It's not their fault, they're not like bad for not being able to kind of fathom what it is you're getting at, but like it's a different level kind of thing. So that was a little bit alien, I'll be honest. But one thing, and this goes back to the punk rock stuff, I'm people don't think that I'm a particularly shy but I'm an introvert for sure. And one reason that I'm really passionate about music in general, but especially heavy metal, the louder, faster, more extreme stuff, is from a young age that helped me get out of my shell. Like, as weird as it may sound, like I've learned a lot about etiquette in mosh pits. and how and nonverbal communication in mosh pits.
I mean, a lot of it is, right. Like, that's the same thing with everything. Is there's a ton of stuff that you can learn that's all contextual from whatever experiences you have, and especially if you're learning Japanese and like coming to Japan, it's like then you have to relearn a lot of that sort of like etiquette
Right.
and body language and everything. And I'm sure it must have been reassuring to have kind of like a similar way of being with the kind of people that you connect with in America,
Right.
also in Japan.
Yeah, and I mean, I had a band in Miyako. Our name was Kraken Strike, like the Kraken from the deep, right?
Yeah.
We were we had fun, but I mean, there's no scene. There was no real scene in most of you. Like in Morioka, there's a few clubs that I went to every once in a while, but like there's not that much of a scene. Whereas Tokyo, like, and very long story, but Tokyo is the metal capital of Japan. Japan's a very punk country,
Yeah.
but Tokyo has like a lot of the metal is in Tokyo. So I was able to start going to shows again, and I mean that's cathartic. That's not to get serious about it, but there's a lot of psychological. I mean, that's trauma that we're basically talking about.
Right. Right.
Being able to connect with people, also kind of chaotic energy, in at concerts, just the feel of the bass, and the performance, and kind of being able to lose yourself in all of that was I'm very happy that I had that. And that's kind of how I started meeting people again. So I started bands here. That's not how I started my first job outside of teaching English. I think that was Craigslist, actually.
Wow.
But anyway, yeah, there was an art gallery in Azabu Juban called Subject Matter. That was they had a like a fundraising campaign for Tohoku for the disaster. So I wrote them just like, yo, it's me. You need a marketing manager? I'm the dude, you got it. Like, come on, you can't find anybody
Right.
better than me. So I started working with them. And that's, Tokyo and Japan, Japanese business in general, is very much based on like relationships and face to face, all of that stuff. And so, yeah, it's an art gallery, right? There's a lot of people with money coming through, C-suite types, business. It's located in, or it was, it's not there anymore, but it was located in Azabu Juban, which is a very prominent neighborhood. And
Right.
so through that, I started meeting, people of various business backgrounds. From there, well, I don't know, like I could keep going, but like, is there what?
No, no,
Should
it's
we
super
pause?
interesting because you went from having this like disaster completely change your life, but then you moved to Tokyo and you were able to because of
Well, I mean, let me
oh,
interrupt you and go back to you. You talk about like life affirming stuff. Like, absolutely, it was, and it gave me a mission. And to this day, I mean, it's really my guiding light of like Tohoku deserves better. Miyako, the city that I'm
mhm,
from, like I love that more, or at least as much. I don't want to play favorites, but at least as much as my hometown. And everything that I do, as roundabout as it may look, is with the intent of somehow in the future, if not right now, supporting Miyako, supporting Iwate, supporting Tohoku, raising awareness, and making that a better situation. There's a lot of guilt. I'll tell you right now, there's a lot of guilt that I had moving to Tokyo, because we had so much more work to do. And I was part of that for, the first 4 or 5 weeks or however long it was. And then, part of me was like, all right, well, am I abandoning this in order to like, it's a good move in terms of like, oh, you're out of a disaster zone. That's positive.
Yeah.
But at the same time, in my head, there was also like, oh shit, like, am I leaving people behind? And so that even to this day is, I mean, that guilt isn't really like I've dealt with that for the most part, but the passion behind it, call it a mission or whatever, of supporting the let's say less popular or less known areas, reaches of Japan, be that geographic or business. There again, like the punk rock thing, I've got a company that deals with Japan's underground music. There is so much talent here, but it falls outside of the radar of what's normal, and so people don't see it. I do all of this stuff with abandoned houses as well, and a lot of the time, they're not bad. They're just off the radar. They're just not this, and that's why they don't get the attention that they deserve. Like all of that goes back to my experience with Miyako, and really want to make sure that the underserved but very deserving communities, people, organizations that do exist, right? It's not like, we're not just talking about something that isn't there, it's just out in the ether or whatever. Like they're there, they're trying really hard, you're just not noticing it. Not necessarily because you're not looking, like it can be difficult. And so a lot of my work,
it can be really hard for people. It can be really hard for people to actually, they don't want to look at that stuff. It's kind of, it seems like too big of a problem for an individual to have much effect on, and it also
it's a
seems like
massive
something
problem.
like I don't like, you know, I would prefer that it wasn't like that, but how much effect can I really have? Like, should I go out there and help? Like, I think a lot of people would just rather kind of pretend it didn't happen or pretend it's fine now, just so that they don't have to think about it because it's too traumatizing to even think about. Imagine for the people who are there, this is like a really huge thing, but for people who weren't there, it's just like I don't want to imagine what
And that's
happened.
fine too. I think a lot of the time when conversations or experiences, happenings such as, but not limited to, the 311. Actually, you know what? It's 311 is kind of a blanket term, right? It's an earthquake, it's a tsunami, and it's a nuclear disaster, right? Um, for a lot of people, it is difficult, and that's fine. Any disaster, right? Like it's heavy stuff, man. Make no mistake about that. And if you're uncomfortable or somehow unable to deal with it, that's fine, you know. And then there are some people that, either it's their calling or, for whatever reason they want to or they feel compelled to somehow contribute in one way or another. Well, then, hey, that's cool too. But I do dislike kind of the binary. I think that happens a lot with disasters in general of, either you're part of it or you're not. And you should be, but you feel like, no, man, like everybody has their own capabilities. Everybody has their own thresholds for this, that, and the other thing. And this, again, very much applies to business as well. So I don't expect or anticipate even, people being interested, caring, or otherwise being capable of contributing to the stuff that I try to do, because that's what I do. That's my calling. That's my thing. If you want to come on board, sure, happy to have you. But if not, don't worry about it.
Yeah. I think that's an awesome place to leave this podcast. I know we had a bunch of stuff that we wanted to talk about before, but I think just making this all about that experience at 311. I mean, that's an incredible story, and I'm glad you survived. I'm glad that there's that you're putting a lot of effort into trying to help those people. So, what are some things that people can do if they want to help out more, or if they, maybe they're interested in finding out more about what happened there and what they can do to assist?
Not well. Okay. Tohoku Live House Daisakusen. I'll send you a link.
Okay, we'll put a link in the description.
Yeah, is a phenomenal effort by my people up in Iwate. So it's in Miyako, it's in Ishinomaki, and it's in Kessen Numa. And I'll make this super short, but basically, with disasters, a lot of people think about food and heat and not being wet and all of these like extremely basic things, which are good to think about. But second level on what is that triangle of human needs, Pavlov's.
Right, the Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah, Maslow, right? Is like community and connection and communication, all these things, right? And so once kind of the food situation got locked down in Tohoku, Tohoku Daipa's Daisakusen started in order to use affected but still viable buildings, reclaiming them and turning them into event spaces. So concert halls and things like that. There's actually a documentary that was released about them in 2013, I believe, by a group of Waseda University students.
Interesting.
So check them out. Honestly, talk to me. I can direct people to other resources and whatnot. There's a bunch. There's Playground for Hope. What else is? I mean, there's obviously, you put me on the spot. I can't think of anything.
We
But
didn't know before the podcast that you were going to talk about all of this stuff, like that we would easily fill the whole, whatever it is, 45 minutes now or something about this one topic. So no, we'll put a link in the description to the organizations you mentioned, and also a way to connect with you if people want to find out more ways that they can help. But I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You've been fantastic. It's really interesting to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a terrible sign off, but
that's awesome. I'm using that.
I blanked.
If you enjoyed that episode and you like what we're doing with Inside Japan, please consider going to iTunes and giving us a 5-star rating and sharing this episode with a friend who you think it might be useful for. As always, a huge thank you to JobsinJapan.com for sponsoring this podcast, and if you're looking for our other episodes, you can find them there, and keep us in mind next time you're looking for work in Japan. Thanks so much for listening, and see you again soon.